So thanks to all of you for joining today on this roundtable discussion about the work we've done so far on creating a standard to measure the accuracy of fuel consumption models. As regulation drives industry transformation, there's an increasing importance and urgency being placed on decarbonization. With IMO's goals set for 2030 and 2050, long-term solutions are now being created by an industry that's realizing it must act. However, there's many actions that can be taken today, voyage optimization being one of them. The industry focus on decarbonization journey has put voyage optimization right in the spotlight, thanks to its ability to immediately both increase TCE earnings, but also generate reduction in carbon emissions. Zero North as a company has saw a need in the market for transparency and a way to benchmark the accuracy of fuel consumption models. These models are the foundation for voyage optimization because to optimize, we must first understand the fuel prediction of a vessel in a variety of conditions. So those of us on this call today, plus 20 others from 10 organizations, have come together as an industry leaders in a new work group to address this challenge and figure out how we can solve it. So thank you for joining us today. George, maybe we can start out with you. Would you please share some of your views on the overarching trends of voyage optimization in the industry and how it's tied to the decarbonization journey?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Laura. So, I mean, yes, I think there's been a trend that started with just a data trend, better understanding how ships are performing, getting more quality data from vessels. So us as charterers, the owners can also understand how well ships perform in different conditions, how the trend in performance changes over time. And because of that, there's been much more focus on getting good quality data from ships, and that allows you to then go ahead and build the models you were speaking about earlier. And these digital twins, these models, as you say, vital for helping us move on to the voyage optimization. I think voyage optimization probably started originally with owners, because a lot of the original tools that were out there were very much focused on collecting data from the owner's point of view. It was going to the owners. It wasn't necessarily being shared with charterers. And that's what's very exciting about Zero North, is it's very much a charterer focused tool, that it doesn't rely on just the data coming from one vessel. It builds on a sort of a much broader data set. And that's very exciting. But we're definitely seeing more and more owners, more and more charterers focusing initially on the data and then working out what they can do to get value from having good quality data. And voyage optimization is an obvious one. I think people are realizing it's a fairly low hanging fruit in terms of decarbonization. It's not a big investment. The savings are real, and they're easily realized. So it's very different from having to install some new hardware on board your vessel or change something on your engine. It doesn't require a dry dock. It doesn't require so taking the vessel out of service for any period of time is fairly easily implemented. So as I say, it's low-hanging fruit in terms of the start of the decarbonization journey.
Yeah, and I mean, that's true. Zero North is very committed to digitalization as a way to decarbonization, as one of the channels that you can take in addition to new fuels and in vessel optimization. So I think also looking at it from a data point of view and how we have gathered multitudes of data and understand that what's needed is accurate fuel consumption models, because in order to optimize, we really need to know the baseline that we're operating from is a proven accuracy. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about the need for a standard and how this helps your organization.
Yeah, for sure. So I think when we started this whole process, we thought we had lots of good high quality data. And as we dug into it, we realized we really didn't. A lot of the data coming off the vessels wasn't verified. Obviously, some of the crews don't spend a lot of time doing it. There's no checking of the data. So when we started to use it in a more systematic way, we almost realized almost 50% of it wasn't usable. It didn't make sense. So it needs to start with high quality data. And then once you have the data, then you can start doing something interesting with it. And as we've discussed, one of the most interesting things is to build these digital twin fuel models that helps you predict how a vessel is going to perform in a given condition and on a voyage. So therefore, you can then plot the voyage and the route to make sure that you're getting the best performance from the vessel given the parameters that you choose. So whether it's to go for full decarbonisation, whether it's to optimize for a bunker lifting, or whether it's optimized for the next cargo lifting, but always with a focus on making sure that you're burning no more fuel than you need to on that particular voyage. So but you say the quality of the models themselves is key. Without good quality first data and then good quality models, you're not going to get a good quality optimization. And it is a difficult problem. There are very many different types of models out there, different approaches to modeling. So it's important that we can compare the different approaches out there and have confidence as users of the models that we're getting an accurate and good product.
Okay, thank you so much. And I wonder about Tobias, from Western Bulk's point of view, what are some trends that you're seeing from your side?
We are seeing an increasing trend, sort of just on awareness as well on the greenhouse gas emissions. Not just people are starting talking about it in a much larger extent than just a couple of years ago, where you see different kind of reporting requirements. You also see different requests from to our charting managers that what's sort of the CO2 footprint if you go to 2 ports instead of 1 port, if you go through the Suez instead of Cape Good Hope, and these kind of decisions where people are actually starting to, if not put a dollar amount on the greenhouse gas emissions, they are certainly more concerned about it and ask for reporting and sort of these figures to be a part of the discussion. And this is something I think fairly new in the bulk industry. And I guess at the end of the day, the pressure is coming through the chain, you can say, from, take an auto manufacturer, for example, are seeing pressures from their customers being us, and they put pressure further down their value chain. And we see, I think, that pressure trickling down to dry bulk, if not as a very early mover, it's at least starting to affect us as well.
Yeah, and I think there is pressure definitely coming from regulations and from customers. So, yes. Do you see that there's the way forward for where the pressure is coming from? I've heard you mention a couple times about commercialization as a way to drive decarbonization. Do you mind talking a little bit more about that?
So actually, I think it's just common sense, right? Because the CO2 emission goes hand in hand with the dollar. So yes, the emissions is getting more and more important. But for me, overall, it is around just looking at the dollar and follow that. And then we'll reduce CO2 emission on a short term. So if from my perspective, a general tendency that we are seeing is very much that the charters who's chartering a vessel used to go on wanted speeds. But because they now become more and more enabled through modeling and through software, they can actually begin to optimize their vessels, even that they've never seen the vessel before, right? And I think that's a new tendency, definitely, that the charters who are paying for the fuel, who will be impacted by the US dollar, are beginning to optimize. And they want to save, and they also, through that, are actually going to save emissions.
Right. And do you feel, Tobias, that fuel consumption accuracy is more critical these days than before, or what's the emphasis that you put on it in your company? Thank you.
Spot on in terms of what Søren said, right? Because we want to, at the end of the day, maximize our profits. And to do that, we need to ensure that our vessels are instructed on the optimal speed, given her characteristics, given the cargo she carries, given the weather and the market conditions. And if sort of the input into that optimization engine is wrong, say, for example, your fuel curve is too flat, most likely you will then end up sailing the vessel at a too high speed, which is not good for your bottom line results, but of course also not good for your greenhouse gas emissions because you are sailing at a too high speed, you could say. And I think secondly, it's also really important as a more human factor, if we want our sort of operators to believe in this and to really emphasize voyage optimization, they obviously need to have the trust in the models, so that they feel comfortable talking with the masters with this, and that they believe in the results that come out of it. And that's much more of a human factor than just the dollar amount at the end of the day.
As the voyage provider of voyage optimization tools, you have to show us as customer that we're getting the good product, that we're getting the right optimization. And obviously part of that relies on having the good quality models. So if you can help us verify the quality and the accuracy of the models, that also helps us verify the quality and accuracy of Optimize as a tool and the optimizations that we're getting, and importantly, give us confidence in the savings that we're claiming from the optimization that we're using.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why we at Zero North, saw that there was a need for some way to quantify and measure, benchmark these fuel consumption models. So, as we have all these data flowing into the optimized platform, we can see that there's different ways that people measure the fuel consumption. And I'd like to actually hear from you, Harshit, because you have a background in naval architecture. And why did you decide to join this work group, and why do you think there's a need for a standard?
I think when we talk about optimization, the key element there, other than the market rate and bunker rates and other commercial factors, the key element is how much is the ship consuming. And depending upon how you model these fuel tables based on principles of hydrodynamics or based on machine learning or a combination of two, it can vary a lot. The accuracy, when you look at it from a different perspective, there's too many different conditions of speed or in drafts, ballast or laden, or so it really depends on how you look at accuracy and whether that models that you are either calculating or predicting is close enough to the actual consumption of the vessels. Because if your optimization is based on a fuel consumption that is not correct, then there is a gap that cannot be filled by optimizing. And the reason why there is, I feel, is a need for a standard to measure this accuracy is because different service providers or in-house systems that companies use, there are different ways of validating how accurate these fuel model curves are, but also based on different constraints like weather and drafts and speeds that you look at. So the same model and fuel curves might look very different in different constraints. So there's a need to have a standard, at least among the companies that are cooperating on a certain level, to achieve results in reducing emissions, and also, like Son said, and improving their bottom line, is to have a standard which we can compare different service providers or our own systems to achieve a certain level of accuracy that is needed either for performance optimization, but also for optimizing the voyages.
Yeah, and I see that, the outcome of this is that it will positively affect the whole industry and the reduction of the CO2 emissions, because we will, have a transparency on the accuracy and which areas need to be worked on in low speeds or in bad weather or laden and ballast. Soren, can you talk a little bit about the positive impact on the industry the standard will have?
Yeah, so first of all, I think we need to be super proud as an industry that so many people are actually trying to model fuel consumption, right? Because it's all around saying, hey, we need to do something. And the engine below of all of that is really understanding the fuel consumption of the vessels, right? So when you have a lot of people looking at it, and I guess it's not a surprise that bunker spend is a big potential market, then of course there will be a lot of people looking at it. But there it then is super important that we can compare apples to apples, because there is actually somebody paying for those modeling that is being done, right? So if you're a customer of a fuel table provider or a fuel curve provider, you of course want to know that you get value for your buck. And I think that's one of them, right? But also by having a uniform standard, everybody can begin to tune and update their own modeling to ensure that they are equally accurate. And that's where, like before a standard, everybody will claim that they are 95 to 98% accurate, right? Because they will just find their own way to and they will find a small corner of the measuring to say, hey, mine is 95, 98% accurate. without actually being able to demonstrate it over a longer time. By having a standard, we can now, as customers of fuel table providers, we can actually benchmark, and we can give feedback in a constructive way of saying where is it that we need to improve, so we can improve together. And I think that is really what the standardization is all about.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a user's point of view, it's great to have a common standard for checking the accuracy. It allows to benchmark different models, to all start talking a common language with the model providers. And all users of the models, if we can have this common language, it obviously makes communication and understanding a lot more straightforward. So yeah, it's a very positive step.
Right. Thank you. I'm curious, because obviously there'll be people watching this and saying, okay, so ours are accurate, or, we're mainly accurate when the vessel is sailing between 12, 13 knots, which is, what, in good weather. So Tobias, I wanted to know from you, what do you guys look at as far as the outliers go in bad weather or in, slower speeds? How important is it to be accurate in those instances for you as well?
Yeah, no, so I think, the main goal is obviously to be accurate in those conditions we see the most, right? And then let's not talk about good weather according to charter party, because that you never see almost, because they are so strict. But if you're talking normal sort of weather conditions, those is really where it needs to be the most accurate. I think if you have issues with your accuracy in sort of a full storm event on a North Pacific route in January, that is maybe less of an issue, because then sort of all cards are off the table anyway, and it's more about the safety of the vessel. You might need to deviate for long distances, and there's so much other things coming into play, but it needs to be accurate so that it covers a wide range of weather phenomenon, and then you're talking much more than just the classical charter party warranty of BU44 and a 1.25 meters wave height, which is like a lake almost, right? So it needs to cover more, but it doesn't need to cover the extreme events. I think that's our perspective.
Yeah, and I think it was super interesting having 20 people in the room coming to a consensus. We had, people, data providers who create these fuel consumption models. We have companies who are doing voyage optimization, such as us and our competitors, and we also had shipping companies such as yours and operators coming together to create this. So I'm Soren, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to know a little bit more about this vision of partnering to actually solve the industry problems, and through digitalization, how we reach decarbonization.
So I actually just wanted to add another note, because just one thing around what are we calling this, right? So some will call it fuel consumption models, other will call it fuel curves, right? And I think it's actually just starting there of understanding the complexity of the beast, right? Modeling fuel consumption in all kind of draft and weather conditions is so difficult, right? So it's much more than a two-dimensional fuel curve that we talk about. This is a full spectrum range that we are actually addressing. And I think that's like just having that common language will set people apart, because some are doing just standard fuel consumption curves, right? And you can't, in my world, you can't use that for anything, right? Because it is a two-dimensional curve in good weather, and the vessel are just like not sailing in good weather. So it has to be much more complex than that. So what it does for us is that we start having a common language, and that's we in order for us to partner, then we add all the knowledge, right? So one of the participants could have come up with a suggestion for a standard, but that would not look as the standard has come out, because the contribution, the knowledge around it is actually what changed, right? And the language that we are beginning to have, the common language around it, is exactly why it needs to be a partnership and not one that can drive it.
Yeah, and we were to get consensus, first of all, to get everyone in the room was so rewarding. And then to come to a consensus and we agree on, where we are today. And that isn't where it's going to wind up. There's a lot more work to be done. And so this work group has committed to solving this problem and working together. And we've also, are going to launch it and are open to others joining in the conversation, because this is a problem that will be dynamic and will continually need to be addressed.
I'd like to thank our incredible speakers for joining us today and sharing their insights. And now we will open it for questions.
Let's kick this off. So, we started to talk a little bit about partnerships and how that can help us. But I wonder, Tobias, if you can say a little bit about where the industry has been and what the transformation that the industry is going through right now, which has made it actually possible for us to create a working group like this.
Sure. A very broad question, but I think, obviously you have a sort of a general mega trend about environmental awareness, which is hitting everyone, right? Obviously, some shipping companies are quite far down the value chain from the end consumers, being us in the end, which drives a lot of these change and drives corporations to change their behavior. But I think that pressure is starting to trickle down also to shipping companies, in particular ourselves in dry bulk. We see that from time to time, in particular with some of the larger charters, that they are having a much more environmental focus, asking for CO2 emission and other types of emission figures on their voyages. What would be their emissions if they had this option versus another options? And obviously that brings the whole thing much more into the decision than it was in the past. And of course, fuel curves is a part of that, right? Which will enable you to sail at the right speed, so to say, to ensure that you hit the balance between the market environment that you're operating in and your sort of CO2 emissions. And that's obviously a part of it.
Yeah. And I think, what you're kind of pinpointing on is that there has to be really accurate data, and the data that's flowing in is really important. Soren, can you talk a little bit about, how do we actually get quality data into the models?
No, so quality data, of course, is an essential part of calibrating the models. And it's not only the vessel data, it's also, of course, the weather data that's important. And I think a lot of things still need to happen on that front, and that people have worked with the quality of the new reports, but I think a lot more can be done on that. And I think that could be a topic for the working group going forward, of saying, how do we actually measure the accuracy of new report or vessel data? So that we actually begin to have, like you're asking, how do we get more accurate data in? Where I would ask, what is accurate data? How are we actually ensuring that we have the same language around that?
Yeah, and I think George kind of said a little bit about that during, the discussion a minute ago. But George, maybe you can talk a little bit more about, from your organization, why was it important for you to join this working group, and what do you think that other cargo owners should pay attention to? Oh, your microphone is muted. Yeah, there. Oh, it worked for a second, but now it's muted again. We can hear you now.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me through the mask? Apologies for that. It's important for us to join. I think it's obviously a very new thing to a lot of people. We've been on this journey for a little while, but we're still learning something new every day. So to help build up confidence for the wider industry, including ourselves, that we're on the right path, we're doing the right thing, the tools make sense and they work. I think it was very important to build up a common framework and a common understanding of how to measure the accuracy of the fuel tables and what was important in terms of determining what good accuracy means. It was very, very helpful for us to build confidence for ourselves and for the wider industry.
Yeah, and I think also what we were trying to accomplish is to create something that is a betterment of the industry and looking at the sustainability of shipping. And Harshit, maybe you can talk a little bit about the key priorities for your organization as far as your pillars of sustainability. Your microphone is muted also. There you go.
Hello. I'm a bit sick, so you might hear a very different voice. But yes, definitely one of the important aspects when you talk about sustainability is what you can do right now. And optimizing the voyages is, of course, high on agenda when we talk about reducing carbon footprint. And this is definitely before, let's say, the greener fuels and alternative engine systems come into play as the environmental restrictions become effective from 23. Voyage optimization is something that you can start doing right now, and us operating around 150 to 170 voyages, we can definitely optimize the voyage for lower fuel consumption and carbon footprint right now. And that's where a tool like this, which optimizes different aspects, come into play.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, we have a question from our attendees. It says, can Zero North use all new reports available through IMUS from the VSON integration to calibrate its digital twin and added resistance models?
So I can maybe take that on behalf of Zero North. And I think it's important to understand that the working group and what we talked about, of course, is an industry thing, right? Of calibrating and having a new report, like having a fuel model for across the industry and not just the Zero North standard. When it comes to the specific question, the answer is a clear yes, I think. But I think more or less everyone in the industry that is doing fuel models will be able to do that. Say what we're also doing is like with IMUS, if you have your new reports there and it comes into our backend, well, we will actually do a sanity check on them, and we can then actually set up as well a feedback to the vessel in case that the data is not accurate, or if there's some cross references within the data that actually needs to be corrected, because it can be like power consumption figures and so on, right? So that is actually what we do in order to boost the accuracy of the fuel tables.
Yeah, thank you. There's a question here. I'm going to read it out. I'm not sure well, we'll see if you guys agree with this. It says, voyage optimization is nice, but it can be assumed that similar vessels will have more or less the same fuel curve, i.e. speed and emissions for similar voyages. So how do you think your approach can reduce significantly emissions? I think we should take it in two parts, because I'd like to hear maybe what you think about the fuel curves, and if you actually think that similar vessels would have the same emissions.
Is it okay? I take it.
Yeah, do you want to take that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a very good starting point, that sister vessels will have the same model, but depending upon how far they are in the dry docking period, how well managed, how good data they are reporting, and how well the performance is being managed on different vessels. The fuel curves can look very different. So I don't quite agree that the similar vessels will have the same fuel curve.
Actually, I would add that it's one of the benefits of using these digital twin models and the model fuel curves. It's a very good way of comparing and benchmarking vessels against each other. So it's another use of the tool. I mean, it's the same. You can use the models in multiple ways. I mean, fuel optimization is one. Benchmarking vessels against each other is obviously another. And looking at the trend in performance through the models is also a very useful way of using them. So yeah, I totally do not agree that vessels perform, even sister vessels perform very, very differently.
I agree, and just as a very specific example, in Western Bulk we have two ships we've been paying attention to for a little while. They're sister vessels, same yard, same design, same delivery time almost. They perform 10% different on certain specific speeds in terms of consumption. So they achieve the same speed, but 10% different in consumption. And they're both quite new. So there are differences just out of the yard as well, almost to pairs like, and no one is able to explain us in detail where these differences are coming from. And also a second point, I think, is, I mean, you will never have a similar voyage, because even if you're going from the same port to the same destination port, the weather will be different. So you will have the weather influence on the fuel curve as well, that you need to take into account. So I think that is important to remember as well.
Yeah, and I think this second point is our question is asking, so how do we how our approach can reduce significantly the emissions? And really what we're talking about today is a standardization for being able to measure fuel curves across the board, so that you can make sure they're accurate enough in which to build upon a voyage optimization. So maybe we can talk about, without talking about how voyage optimization works, but more about broadly how this standard and how this working group believes that by the industry working together, we can help the decarbonization journey. Because a lot of people talk about the different fuels and the efficiencies on a vessel, but how do we actually, through digitalization and through technology, improve, help the journey to decarbonization? So who wants to take that? Soren, do you want to start perhaps?
No, yeah, I'll be very pleased to do that. And the standard is so vitally important, because then we're not debating around the measuring in itself. We can then actually turn our attention to turn those models and that accuracy of the models into actions. That's the only way that anyone that is in this market can actually do anything about the emissions, is actually ensuring that the underlying modeling is as accurate as possible, and then turn it into actions. Without that, we don't reduce anything. So I think that's why the standards is super important, right? Because then we don't spend our energy there. We'll spend the energy more around how do we actually make it better, and not debating if one is better than the other, but debating how do we all make it better for the models and thereby for the environment.
Yeah, Tobias, maybe you can talk a little bit about, how you see technology paving the way towards something you can do today to reduce emissions.
I think Harshit also mentioned some of it already, in the sense that this is something you can implement straight away, right? You don't have to wait for some lengthy installation of technical equipment or new fuels to develop or something like this. You can actually run your vessel in there today, and you get the fuel curve very quickly, and you're up to speed. And once you have that, you can start optimizing on your voyages immediately. And also for us, which charter all our vessels, typically on short-term contracts, we are not in a position to install any equipment or do anything like that anyway. We are sort of more dependent on what the market does and what the owner decides to do with their ships. So this is, I think, one of the more important things we can do as an operator, which have limited influence on the actual ship and the ship design.
Yeah, and you talked about how your vessels were, some of them on short term, and I think Harshit, you guys have that issue as well, where you are able to build digital twins for the fleet that you own, but then you have a lot of vessels on time charter in and out. So how can we also use the standard, or rethink the way that a fuel model can help us by having like quick models, or how are you guys dealing with these two different scenarios that your vessels face?
I think the challenge with these shorter term vessels is we have absolutely either no data or very limited data. So it's important to have a fairly reliable fuel model to begin with, because if you have a vessel for, let's say, a few voyages, and you're not sure how the ship is going to perform, so you can take two roads. Either you can bet on the vessel that she's performing, and then you can think of optimizing, and after the first voyage maybe you realize it's not performing as per charter party, so you can try to run on full speed and try to make a performance claim instead of optimizing the speed. But then the other factors come into play. If there was any good weather during the voyage, how tricky are the speed and consumption clauses in the charter party, and all that. So it makes it quite a qualitative decision actually to figure out whether you should optimize speed or you should just stick to the traditional approach of guaranteed full speed and think of making a performance claim. But as more and more charter party clauses are getting trickier, it's getting even more clear that optimizing on the whole fleet on the speed will bring more returns than some of the losses you might think due to not making a performance claim. So that's also a very clear approach, that when you take the new ships for a very short duration and you have a fuel model which is reliable, and then you can adjust it as you have more data, then you can start optimizing on a larger amount of vessels in your fleet.
And Laura, can I just comment, because I think the key word there is reliable fuel models. And I think this is what the standard helps on, in ensuring that we have a common language around what is a reliable fuel model, meaning that anyone that is using a fuel model will have an understanding if it's reliable, and then actually trust, because we have a standard, that they can use it to optimize. And I think that's a whole turnkey around what we're trying to achieve here as an industry, is that standard is meaning that when Hasid or anybody else says reliable, we know what reliable means. And that's definitely a tendency we are seeing a lot across, is that now the market is much more into not just going the warranted speeds and claiming each other, but much more on using the reliable fuel curve to optimize their fleet. And I don't know, George, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you see that point as well.
100% agree. I think, as Harshit said, it's getting harder and harder to make claims. The clauses are written in ways now that you waste more time and money trying to make the claim than you do actually in succeeding in making a claim. So it makes much more sense to try and change that relationship that charterers have with the owner and build a more collaborative one. And optimization of speed and getting away from just focusing on the warranted speeds and consumptions makes more sense for us as a charterer and the people that pay the fuel bill. Makes sense for the overall decarbonisation of the industry as well. So it's definitely something that we need to do.
Yeah, great. I wonder, all of you come from organizations who are thought leaders and pushing the industry forward. You also have you're open to partnerships, you're open to data sharing, you're open to on a journey towards decarbonization. And so I'm wondering if there's some advice you can give to other companies who maybe have a similar road ahead of them that maybe aren't as far along as you, and is open-minded to, to sharing. So maybe we could start with you, George.
I think, as we've said before, this is a relatively easy thing to do. There's no big capital outlay up front. It's something you can do across the whole fleet relatively easily and quickly. It's fairly easy to implement. I think the difficulty comes in understanding, getting comfortable with the technology. And as I think this is a step in the right direction, as I said right at the very beginning, it gives people confidence that what they're looking at and what they're using is reliable, is accurate. And I would encourage people that are looking at this to reach out to anybody. For myself, they can reach out. We're happy to talk and give our experiences. I mean, more than welcome to do that. It's a step more people should be taking.
Great. And I think that is right. Like, yes, we can commit in our own companies to making a change, but we also have to inspire other people to make that change in order for us to all, work together. Mm-hmm. We do have a question here, which is around will there be a revision to charter party obligations from the owner side with the implementation of this new regulation coming in 2023, as owners will be responsible for the vessel meeting the AER requirements? And if so, what can be such obligations? There's someone here who can take that.
I mean, I'll have a go. I think it's an extremely good point. It highlights again that the relationship between charter and owner has to change. He's right. The person's right in the sense that a lot of the new regulations cross over the current and blur the current charter owner relationship, where owners are responsible for certain things, but the control of the vessel is with charterers. And the current charter parties don't deal with that kind of a situation very well today. So it starts with, as I said previously, a more collaborative relationship. We can't have this defensive kind of contractual relationship that we have today. That's not going to get the industry to where it needs to get to.
Yeah, and I think that's right. It's really about asking the tough questions that, business as usual is not, we can't do that anymore. And now this next question, I think, is also in the same vein. Due to bunker costs being included in the freight for tankers, do you see greater challenges to bring those charterers on board? So, I don't know, Soren, you're familiar with the tanker market. Maybe you can take that one.
No, yeah, I think it's the transparency and the impact that cross the different silos, being the cargo owner to the operator to the vessel owner. We will through transparency and standardization see that those barriers will be broken down and create incentives across the supply chain, and that has to happen so everybody is aligned. Because right now there's a misalignment between the different parties, being the ship owner, being the operators, being the cargo owner. They're not having the same incentives to optimize or to leave room for the others, right? And I think the tanker industry is a good example of saying that a lot of the bigger tanker cargo owners are saying that emissions is very important, and then they go to the spot market and saying yes, and you can sell 13.5 knots. And we've done some studies on that, right? And saying, what about if you actually released it to and said it will be between 11 and 14 knots, and still fixing the ETA of the vessel? Well, you'll actually be able to realize. I think we saw anywhere around 700 to 1 million tons of CO2 emission reduction by releasing those kind of charter party terms and allow the supply chain to optimize. But it's not being done because there's no way to measure and align the incentives from an economical point of view. So I think definitely it's a very good point, and we need to do something around that. And from a standardization point, I think we have done the first initial version now on a standard for fuel models. I think a lot more work can go into that. I think there's two other parameters for standardization that's going to be important on this. The one is being how do we measure the data from the vessels and ensuring what is accurate data from the vessels. So creating a similar standard for that. And I think equally, because a lot of optimization that we're talking about comes into the weather routing element, it's fine that we are saying that we need to do the speed of the vessel, but the weather routing element of the speed of the vessel is very correlated. And there we again are seeing a very big discrepancy between the different players around what is actually a weather safe route. It's a little bit up to each individual company to set those standards, and everyone have their own opinions. So that again will be one of the facts where we're saying, okay, what is actually a weather safe route, and could we in this forum begin to have that open discussion as well and cross share why people are actually setting certain parameters around and what will happen if we change those. So I think those are the two next big topics to discuss. Keep on dwelling on this, but talk about the standardization of measuring the data accuracy. Also, sensor data. Sensor data is not the holy grail. We are also seeing discrepancies on that part. So standardization for vessel data and standardization for what is actually a weather safe route is two topics that I think is vitally important for us to be able to connect the dots between the supply chain.
Yeah, Thank you. Okay, so this was actually, we're now running out of time for our live Q&A. There's a couple of questions I didn't get to, so I will try and figure out how we can get those answered in the future. But basically what's next for this working group is we'll have another meeting early in October. And if anyone in the audience is interested in joining, we're very open to accepting people who, are passionate about helping bridge the gap that's in this industry and moving forward towards our decarbonization, towards data accuracy, towards building standards, and lastly, to asking the tough questions about how do we actually change as an industry and how do we work together through partnerships. So thank you all for joining us today for Zero North's webinar. And thank you to my speakers who were fantastic and shared their insight, and even that you are open to sharing, people reaching out to you. So thank you so much and have a really nice afternoon.
Thank you.
Laura.
And
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.